All right, kia ora, kia ora.
Kia ora.
And kia ora. Kei te pehe koe.
Kei te pai.
Kei te pai. Kia ora whānau and welcome to another episode of Creative Talk here with myself, Kebrasca King, Managing Director of King Creative Media, and...
Amber King, the actual boss at King Creative Media.
That never gets old.
No, I know.
We only get older.
Speak for yourself.
Anyway, kia ora koutou. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are really excited for today. We've been holding back as much as we can the excitement that we've got for a very special guest who we are just so grateful to have him spend some time and share some space with us today. A very special guest who is our very first interview on our Creative Talk podcast.
Yes. And his name is Nigel Eru. He is a medium, a healer, a tohunga. He is our friend, our teacher, our mentor. Oh, I'm tearing up. Kia ora, Nigel. We're just going to get him to come in again on his audio.
Tēnā kōrua, Kebrasca, Amber. Lovely to see you and sit with you and to have a kōrero.
So nice to see you.
Kia ora, Nigel. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to share some space and obviously get everyone to learn and ask questions and also spend some time with you during our podcast today. So thank you so much for being available for us.
No worries.
Now, Nigel, would you like to start our podcast with a karakia?
Absolutely, absolutely. Manawa mai te mauri nuku, manawa mai te mauri rangi. Ko te mauri kei au, he mauri tipua. Ka pākaru mai te pō, tau mai te mauri. Aumi e, hui e, tai.
Kia ora, Nigel.
Oh, thank you. All right. So,
Shall we get into it?
I think we should. We've got a lot of questions to ask.
Amber, I love how you're the boss.
Yeah,
You know it.
she's all ready to go. Do you want to get into some of the questions that we've got? We've got a whole bunch of questions to ask you, Nigel, and really covering different topics that we know we've learnt and shared with you personally as a mentor and teacher. And I think it'd be great to share some of those with the wider audience as well. Do you want to go first?
I think so.
Yeah.
Firstly, I just wanted to, introduce Nigel and just get a bit of information about you, where you've started. You have been working in this spiritual realm for quite a long time. So yeah, like where did that come from? When did you first realize you had spiritual abilities?
Look, I can as early as I can remember, that would be the true answer, because I remember walking around on the beaches and the homeland. I'm from the far north in New Tarini, so that's a very spiritual land there, and I recall spending a lot of time on my own, but I never felt alone. I always felt that there were others with me and engaging with me, helping me discover things along my journey. So I do recall that, and the relationship that I had with the spirit world back then was very much one of just helping me to kind of feel more comfortable. And without me realizing it, it just kind of felt very natural. And then, of course, as I got older, I became more engaged or more involved in my career and kind of getting that up and running and that kind of thing. So I kind of didn't really embrace it until much later on, actually. And I'm a believer in this piece around the spirit world choosing us, particularly for us as being origine to Aotearoa. There's the sense of us being chosen by our ancestors to kind of help in the healing of the lineage, or that kind of thing. So that responsibility didn't land till after, and in fact, um, the perhaps the my spiritual development was very much contextualized by my own healing journey.
Mm.
And that does tend to be the way, I think, for most people. And I mean, I was born an identical twin, so I had that telepathic piece already in place, and that's how I communicated with my brother.
Right.
And so that kind of felt um, very normal, having that style of communication. um, and then that kind of it very much progressed from there. Yeah.
Nigel, in your whānau with your twin and also with the other members in the family, were there anyone else that showed abilities or gifts? And is there anyone in the lineage as well that kind of had the same thing?
So the grandmothers obviously are the healers. So my grandmother Te Kouti Hetaraka, so she was the tohunga, the whānau tohunga, and her mother and her grandmother. So it kind of came down through that part of the lineage. And and then it kind of, as I said, it landed with me, and and initially I didn't really understand what that meant, because I didn't grow up um, embracing spirituality in that way,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Would you say, Nigel, so you come from your heritage, some of your heritage is Māori, Ngāpuhi. Would you say that people who, from a tribal background or ethnic backgrounds have more of a connection to spiritual abilities, or is it, can anyone just embrace it?
That's a very interesting discussion, because I think for the Aborigines and Aboriginal people to Aotearoa, obviously, as we brought up to respect ancestors, there are the rituals and ceremonies there which make that more present for us, right? And it's not uncommon to connect with the dead or invite them to be present with us. That's part of who we are, so that it's perhaps more accessible in that way. But as I reach back into my Pākehā ancestry, and my sixth great grandfather Charles Clement, they're French, and from the Loire Valley in France, from a place called Nevers, and they're deeply spiritual. Connecting with those ancestors, they're, we forget that, don't we? How if we, and it's the same for most of us. But you're right in the sense of it being more awakened and more present. For our Aborigine community, for our whānau, for mana whenua, definitely it's present. We express it in the karakia. I mean, that's really what we were talking about in that karakia, was about embracing the life force and using that in a way to shatter the darkness and to gather it and manifest it in a way to our betterment. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? Because if we were sitting there and we were saying the Lord's Prayer, a different process.
Correct.
Like,
yeah, it would be.
That access to spirituality is perhaps it's not less present, but perhaps less aware, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. In that beginning phase as well, especially with, growing up with Māori being predominantly the culture, were there particular modalities that you focused on or gravitated towards when you first started on your journey?
I think it's so I grew up, my spiritual development started in the church, actually. It's so interesting, isn't it? So, because obviously in New Zealand with the Tohunga Suppression Act in the early
Yes.
1900s, that really changed things and separated us from our spirituality, and we see a lot of our whanaunga just really embracing a religious context, and that is absolutely fine, you know. Um, but yeah, I think I think that firstly, everyone's capacity to connect to their own spirit is fundamental to whatever you're going to do, and for some people, um, gravitating to an ideology or a methodology that provides that access is just as important or can be important. And in fact, in the greater schemes of things, I had to come here to Melbourne in Australia to learn how to heal and to fully manifest and orient my spiritual abilities. And that started within the confounds of a spiritual development group, which was this spiritual church here in Victoria, in Brunswick, where I live.
Right.
And I spent years developing in that group, and and so that's for anyone who's perhaps thinking about embarking on that that kind of way of working, what you will get is you'll get an introduction to things like spiritual healing, mediumship, psychic ability. And I mean, you guys know a bit about that because you work in that space now. You do volunteer work, and you
That's
work
right.
with the church. You do that at the readings day, and that's awesome. That you do that. But it's a great place, I think, to shape your development. Um, and you get access to some really good teachers through that space as well. And my teacher was she was a natural channel, and that was her strength as a medium, and as a channel. She would give demonstrations in that way, standing up in front of the congregation and channeling a guide, and it would speak through her to the audience. And we know that now as trance channeling or
Yes.
trance speaking. Um, but yeah, I think, so growing up in that old school arena, so healing would be um, sitting there with mediumship as the primary pieces to kind of frame and structure my spiritual development early on. Yeah.
So you mentioned healing is an important part of spiritual development. What, what does that involve? What kind of healing and, what kinds of things do you do there?
Okay. So, excuse me. um, so I because I work in this space, um, you've got to look at it from a couple of different perspectives, and certification qualifications is certainly a perspective, as you know, because here in Australia, if you're working as a practitioner, as a healer, you know, you've got to be able to show a certain level of aptitude. You've got to have
Correct.
qualifications, certification, and you need that in order to have insurance and kind of work in that space. So so there's those boxes that you have to tick, yeah. and and for me, you know, I've gained master healing qualifications in a number of modalities. So, and they would be mainly energy healing. So, Sikkim, Ashanti, Alcemia,
Yes.
Soul Rescue. And you're familiar with that, guys, because
Yes.
you're also master healers. So you understand that. But my naturalness is as a spiritual healer. And Whereas with energy healing, you are exercising the portal through the client. With spiritual healing and trance healing, you become the portal, and you are yielding, connecting with the spirit world, and they are you become the vessel for healing, and that is then channeled through you. So that is the way in which our ancestors would have healed, connecting with the spirits of plants, animals, minerals, ancestors, you name it, affinity spirits. That's something that I am really interested in, and even, I mean, Amber, you would know because you do crystal dreaming, and so you work in that space where you're you know you're kind of going off grid, aren't you?
Yeah.
But that's really exciting, isn't it? Because the thing that really dictates that, I believe, obviously, as you grow and mature as a healer, you, if you're honest, and you're honest about your own development, you work in conscious relationship with the spirit world, and they are bringing you the clients, the people who need healing. And a lot of the work that you do and growing and maturing and learning is going to be through your client work, actually.
This is true.
And and through and through navigating those road bumps, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're very real.
Yes. Yes, we know.
And they're ongoing.
And no one wants to talk about that shadowy side of healing, but it's very real for the healers, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yes.
If we have time to touch on protection,
Well,
it's an important aspect, right?
Oh, yes, totally.
And, so setting that karakia, having the intention behind that in creating the energy to the space and how we work today, and through any kind of healing work or spiritual work that we do, laying that foundation stone is an important part to how we move forward. So, it's the same when we're stepping into the healing space. But you are going to be encountering things that aren't taught in the books, and so having that kind of access and open discussion with other healers is an important part of your development, and also that honesty is going to come in, right? Because I remember in my early days of doing energy work, and and seeing for the first time, an attachment crawl out of someone's chakra, and I'm heavily clairvoyant, and as they have a particular look about them.
Yes.
And they, when they see you, they make a run for it. So some of them do. That's before I learned how to put those boundaries there. They don't have far to run. So okay, so but it's incidences like that, isn't it, Amber? And Kebrasca, you're a master healer too. So you come to the space where you encounter a problem, and you quickly realize that your training doesn't cover it.
Correct.
And so you've got to ad lib, and you've got to kind of trust yourself in some way, and you setting a you're opening a door to allow new things to happen. And so I guess moving from energy healing and then navigating through into sound healing was an important step, because as you know, energy healing is not going to remove entities, it's not going to remove attachments. So you need to kind of as you grow and develop, you've got to take on board other methodologies that are going to help with the things that you're working with, and the spirit world are going to support you on that journey. How have you felt about that?
Yes, I am I definitely agree about it's not all in the book, and a healing doesn't always go by the book, as we found out with the healing that I did with you, Nigel, on my crystal dreaming session. So yes, I think it is good to have the groundwork in place to be able to handle those things off the cuff, or to figure out, okay, so this has happened, my protections are in place, and, I can kind of work on this part of it, or kind of pivot. Yes, so, and you're one of the people that's taught us that groundwork, and, I'm very, very grateful for that.
And in the same respect, I think a lot of the growing of being a healer and having the opportunity to work with people, for me, the growing's actually been in those sessions where you don't know what's going to happen.
That's right.
And you have to go outside the box of what you've been taught, and trust in your feeling, and trust in the energy, and trust you're the right person to do the right thing in that moment. And that's when I've had profound support and experiences with clients in that room that has just truly allowed me to learn and gain confidence in a way that I don't think you'd ever be able to do that if you were sitting in a classroom interaction. There's the classroom learning, and then there's the client learning, and both together is what truly just, blows me away every single time.
Yeah, and I mean, you're both perpetual students, so that's fantastic. It's a once you step onto the path, it's incredibly addictive, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It
And
is.
it's so enjoyable, and it's times like that. Even though at the time, when we like I remember talking to Kate, my teacher, and she's been a teacher of yours
Yes, yes.
as well, and and just talking to her about, you know, seeing this thing that looked like a cross between a crab and a tarantula walk, crawl out of someone's chakra. And so a lost soul is going to have that appearance. But I was freaking out,
Yeah.
and not, and it just kind of paid. Then, I was like, shit, how do I deal with this? How am I going to, how am I going to deal with this, and overcoming my fear at the same time. And I think that it's, um, it can be said for any part of spiritual development. There's got to be this element where you are carried outside of your comfort zone, and that is the place, is what you were talking about there,
Yes.
Kebrasca. That's the piece that helps us to grow, isn't it? So,
Totally.
and like you, Amber, I'm very grateful, for the things that I've learned in that way. But you've also got to be, you've got to hold a very positive perspective too, and that would be because at the time we're just freaking out, but you've got to you've got to say to yourself, why would the spirit world be showing me something like this?
Correct.
Why would I be experiencing this now? What is the reasoning behind this? So I think if you're, you know, if you're encountering that, if you're seeing that, you're sensing it, you've got to embrace that this concept that actually part of your work is going to be in that space.
Yeah, exactly.
And as scary as that might be, that that is where the pot of gold is,
Yes.
you know. um,
Yeah. We do have a question here from Danilo in New Zealand. Kia ora, Danilo. So he just missed the beginning, but he wanted to know, Nigel, what kind of healing practices or modalities do you do? I know you do a lot.
okay, so so in the energy space, I do Sikkim, Ashanti, Alchemia, soul rescue work. In the sound space, I work with percussion and also with solfeggio. So that's a tuning fork system. And I find percussion and sound, and that's going to be your own voice as well. So I have things like drums, so medicine drums that I use, and rattles, this kind of thing. There's your hands, your voice. That's really important, an important aspect to that. Spiritual healing, you've got to learn that from another spiritual healer. Yeah, so you can't go and do a certified course in that. So I learned that in the spiritual churches, and and so I was taught spiritual healing through that modality, and and because I also trained at Arthur Findlay College in the UK, that as part of my mediumship development, spiritual healing was part of that. Yeah. So, and of course, so I've studied trance in that space as well. So, yeah, so spiritual healing, trance healing. Yeah. And that's, I think as we progress forward, as you grow as a healer, I think energy healing is a great place to start.
I agree.
To 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 have a foundation, because as you progress through the different levels, you become attuned to those energies, and you integrate those energies as part of your development, and it in many ways creates a kind of structure within you, and a relationship to energy and the spirit world as part of that. Yeah. But you would need to then also work on the orientation of your ability. So that would have to include things like psychic and mediumistic development, because if you're planning on working into the space of spiritual healing or trance healing, you need to add mediumship to that. And of course it is mediumistic in its approach, because you're working with the dead, you're working with spirit guides, you're working with the spirits of plants, and you're yielding that in a way to the so you've got to learn how to work with the spirit world. Whereas where you're in that energy space, quite often, like Sikkim, Reiki, and to some degree the Alchemia and Ashati, they use symbols, and that's very prescriptive. You're placing the symbol, you're pulling the energy through the portal and the client, and then you're moving that, whereas in the spiritual domain, you are the vessel for the healing, and that you are the medium, and you become that vessel for healing, which is then channeled through you. So it's quite a different approach. Yeah.
So Nigel, would you say, if you were going on, or even just curious about learning a modality, would you say that energy would be a good one to start with, and then build upon
Absolutely.
that as your next steps?
And you wouldn't find it too difficult to find a class or a teacher with that. Yeah. But I would, if you are interested in mediumship, I would say join a circle, because in that circle, you will learn how to develop, and as part of that, healing becomes part of the piece that supports your spiritual development. Yeah.
Would you say that before people go on that healing journey, and a question that we get asked quite a lot is, is everybody gifted in some way, shape, or form, and how do they know what gifts they've got as well?
Yep. So firstly, everyone is psychic. So everyone, being an incarnate soul being, and gives you access to a multidimensional approach to the universe. So everyone has that ability to reach within. Yeah. Not everyone wants to, though.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit, as you would know, it's a little bit like going to the gym.
It is.
You've got to build those muscles, you've got to strengthen them.
Yeah.
So developing in circle is actually a key component to that, you know. So, um, so yes, find a good teacher. You know, there's that old saying which says, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. When the student is really ready, the teacher disappears. Yeah.
I
So
remember that.
that is incredibly true.
Yeah, wow. Wow.
Does that answer that question?
It does. Yes, it does.
Wow. So let's look at one of the things that you do work in a lot, Nigel, is ancestral healing. Do you want to tell us some of your work around that? And yeah, what is it? What is ancestral healing, and how can that benefit people?
Okay. So one of the pieces of why I was called to this work has got a lot to do with my own personal healing, and I think is just to kind of perhaps add to what you were asking previously, Kebrasca, is that our own healing needs to be the focus. So our own healing and the advancement in that has to in some way shape our approach to healing. So um, and um, I'm going to be very direct about this, and I hope your listeners will be okay with it. But I come from a background of a lot of violence, and um, growing up in that space, and that was a very diverse form of violence, and a lot of that contextualized by family patterns, things like addictions, you know, issues running through the bloodlines around things like the impact of war, generational types of abuse, that kind of thing. So I know that I'm not alone in that. I feel that a lot of people do experience trauma, not everyone. Um, for some reason, it landed on me. And I was, you know, talking about this with my cousins this morning, and we were like, you know, because my grandmother and my great great grandmother, they were Tohunga, and so, you know, and it's quite unusual, of course, when you're turning up, you know, to a tangi, and everyone's looking at you, and you know, or um, too scared to come and talk to you, you know. So you know, because people kind of, some people feel a little bit uncomfortable with that. Now it's
Yeah.
changed. Um, so you know, I think it's got to do with your own experiences with family primarily, um, but um, one of the things that we have to comprehend is that our thoughts are not our own. Um, that even our thoughts are shaped by our ancestors. You know, they have the ability to walk through us, to be part of us. Yeah. They're present in our space, in our lives, in our work. Um, and the minute we embrace that and are open to that, we would then need to think about, okay, on what terms does that need to be based? How do we build that structure? And so stepping forward into ancestral work has got a lot to do with that. And for a lot of people who have really struggled with, you know, generational abuse or trauma, family patterns, you know, this kind of thing, the setting of boundaries can be extremely difficult, particularly if you're empathic.
Yes.
As you guys know. And you know, so you know, so you know, it's quite a, you know, it's quite a dynamic situation to be in. And you know, from the outside it can feel like a crazy mission, can't it? You know,
An impossible one,
you know,
yes.
you know, we're you know, having to fly the plane and fix the plane at the same time.
That's
That's
right.
kind of a that's what we're doing. So so I think that at the same time, one of the things that we often have to embrace in this space is how to manage fear, you know, and that is very real when we're talking about working with ancestors, because not all of the dead are equally well. And when we're talking about ancestors who have led very troubled existences, or perhaps at times have been deeply unethical, we've got to bring an awareness to that, and at the same time we've got to prioritize our own wellness in that equation. So ancestral healing is something that I teach, and I'm I think it's term 3 that I'll be doing that this year, and that starts in August. Yeah, and it is a very popular course that I teach, but I would have to say that it's hands down one of the most pivotal things that we can do. Because when you grow up and you're working in conscious relationship with spirit guides, and you're learned how to harness your own energy, through energy work, energy healing, taking that to that space and engaging with ancestors in that way is deeply empowering.
Yeah.
And you're working with a crowd of tupuna who are masters in that space, so you have to understand that our abilities, the very essence of that they hold the highest concentration of that. So going back to that point where that exists, and working with them in conscious relationship, one-on-one, and becoming their student, and being being held through that journey of development, and coming into alignment with them, obviously, with authenticity. You then start to walk very differently. You then have the ability to heal on a much greater level, and also as part of that, there's an opportunity for the dead who are not well, our ancestors in that space, to join the call to prayer, to join that vortex of containment and healing that is yielded through the lineage, and for them to become part of that and partake in their own healing as well. So it's a very powerful thing to be involved in, and it is something that I've personally found to be deeply empowering and life-changing.
And in my experiences of working with you in your classes of ancestral, the healing part for me has been extremely profound. My family, we weren't the type of family that grew up and loved and were really close together at all. It was a very violent, turbulent upbringing for us. But my brothers and I, we were never close. And before starting the ancestral portion, which was really about, for me, understanding where that kind of trauma began and started, and how I can try to heal that part in my own life, did I actually start seeing profound changes in my real life today. And now, after years of working with yourself and doing ancestral, my brothers and I have the best relationship that we've ever had in my entire 47 years of life. And my sister-in-law is now opening up to this side as well. And I truly believe that that's because of the work that's been done both here and on the line, all at the same time. And it's been absolutely mind-blowing for me to, one, learn it, and then two, see the benefits of how that kind of plays out. within the families, and it's just amazing, absolutely amazing.
So that containment, that piece of healing that you've been supporting, that has been moving down your lineage. So I'm very much aware that that is sitting with you now. And so, I mean, that's fantastic that you put that effort in there, that they're there. And so, of course, that will be affecting the living now, so that's, um, did you feel that energy? Because that's been with you a little while. Did you feel that when it first arrived? Did you get a kind of a sense that it was close, ancestrally close? And then as that started to create momentum, did you have a sense of,
There was quite a few big shifts for me. The first one was I went from a place of fear and trauma and not being able to be in certain spaces with certain people
yeah,
to be able to sit with these people and have conversations that normally would either make us cry, make us angry, make us, walk away from each other. And it completely flipped itself
yeah,
for me, to where those things don't trigger me anymore, and I can sit there and support my family, and at the same time be able to help them through the things they're going through
yeah.
without it triggering me. And that's a big shift for me. Huge, absolutely huge.
It's interesting, isn't it? Particularly when, we have siblings who are starting to behave differently.
Correct.
From that work that you've done, they're benefiting from that work that you've done. So, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then I even got my mum in on
did?
one of the ancestral healing classes, didn't I, Nigel? And she
Well, I was
is,
just thinking about that, and it'd be lovely to see your mum again.
Yes, it would
yes,
be.
it
Pat,
would be.
come on back, Pat.
It would
And
be if she was game, but because she is the kind of person that wants to know everything all at once, all at the beginning, she struggles being the student because she's a teacher. So I think
Amber, I've seen that before.
I wonder where, Nigel. It's not me.
Me too. I've seen that.
Oh, I always remember when Paco first turned up, your wolf, and you were like, but he's angry.
Look, Paco's been put in the kennel because I've got a cat now.
That was classic.
No, yeah, it has worked a lot for my family as well. I feel, even though my mum thinks, I got nothing, it's actually by osmosis. I feel like it's working for her.
That's right. And, I mean, um, it would be fair to say that you've come just leaps and bounds in a very short time, Amber.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Wouldn't it be
absolutely.
correct to say that? I mean, look what you're doing now. You're doing readings day. You're working professionally as a medium. And so you're a quick study, yeah. But I think at those initial stages, we all go through that space, don't we? Where we disbelieve the
Yeah,
message that we're getting. We don't trust ourselves enough.
yeah,
Our mind gets in the way.
yeah,
That's right.
and and of course we have to be focused on our own healing through that, and um you know so yeah so I think ancestral work is something that everyone can benefit by. But I think to launch into doing ancestral work, to launch into that as your very first thing, that can be a leap, that can require quite a big leap of faith. Would you agree?
yes. Yeah, probably should have started my mum off in something else.
And and work on a bloodline that
That's
Isn't so?
easy.
Yeah, correct.
disrupted.
Yeah.
Nigel, are there signs, or are there for the people who haven't heard anything about ancestral before? Are there signs or things that wounds or traumas that kind of they can look at and be like, look, I think this might help your day-to-day life if you did some ancestral work? Are there things that we can suggest?
It's interesting. That's a very interesting question, because a lot of people don't recognize the pattern, because they live with it. I think An obvious one would be something like addiction,
Mm.
right? And or mental health issues even. You know, it doesn't have to be physical abuse
Yeah.
or sexual abuse. You know, it can be something, you know, it can be something as devastating as abandonment.
Mm.
So, I mean, when I think about it, my father felt abandoned by his father,
Mm.
you know, and there was, you know, there was abuse there.
Yeah.
There were addictions there. I was abandoned by my father. We've both struggled with addiction, you know, and dealing with that sense of abandonment. So we've got to be, I think we've got to be honest with ourselves when it comes to, um, you know, looking at things like family patterns,
Mm.
you know, I mean, because they can be subtle, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it can be
Yeah.
something like avoidance,
Yeah.
you know, it can be something like shame,
Mm.
you know, in fact, that is very destructive, you know, it can be betrayal, it can be a betrayal of trust, it can be loss and grief, you know, so I think in a lot of families, we don't like to talk about our loss or our grief. We
Yeah,
don't like
true.
to appear vulnerable,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, and that in itself can be a pattern,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
where we bottle things down. We don't talk about our feelings. You know, this family, we don't talk about our feelings.
Yep.
Coming and
That's
talking about
ours.
that
That's,
at the dinner table.
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
that's
No one's
right.
going to
exactly.
be listening.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
you'll be
right.
told to, you know, shut up. You know, um, so so you've got to be honest. So step one, you've got to obviously recognize, and it's not as obvious. So, you know, I think if you can identify some of those things there that are present, that is good reason enough, you
Mm.
know. You know, when it's something like mental health, you know, so I know that my dad had anxiety. You know, I struggle with anxiety and depression at times, and
Mm.
you know, and that depression as a result of as a way of me managing my trauma. Yep. So, you know, so I think um, you've got to have the self-awareness to be able to identify those aspects about yourself that are very much positioned in the lineage.
Mm.
And we forget, don't we, that our ancestors are actually alive in us. They are literally there. You know, their footprint, their divine footprint, their
Mm.
blueprint is embedded within our DNA. They're very present. You know, that is handed to us, and that is something that we, as part of our spiritual journey, we need to embrace and work through.
Yeah.
That is part of our contract in being here. Yeah.
Yes. Just just moving on to now spiritual protection and practices, Nigel. So we know that you are a stickler for these, and now so are we, because we fully understand why they are needed. But maybe explain a bit about what they are. And so if somebody's wanting to get into a spiritual practice, why do they need to put protections in place, and why are
Yeah.
they so important?
Yeah. I think, you know, this is a subject which no one wants to talk about.
Mm.
You know,
Agreed.
it's controversial. I'll firstly just um, say that. And secondly, whenever we're talking about this subject, we've got to think of some of the spiritual laws that are present, yeah, and that of correlation, yeah, and what that is saying is that what is happening above us, around us, beneath us, has a correlation to us, essentially. Yeah. like attracts like. Yeah. So, and I think it's always important to look at this framework and how we would approach this as we would in our physical waking life. Yeah. and and a good example of this would be, to identify those people, situations, and relationships in our life currently, or even in the past, that have demonstrated or revealed an element of toxicity, an element of perhaps unethical behavior, or even have brought, consequences that can be quite negative. And this can be a friend at school, it can be a workmate, it can be, a relative, and so how we would approach this is it um, would be determined by the situation and the relationship, so for example, an extreme example would be that, if we encountered some deeply troubled and dangerous people, at the train station, catching a train into the city, well, we'd probably display a physical boundary, wouldn't we? We wouldn't want to
Correct.
go and sit right next to them, you know, or even when we're on the train, we wouldn't want to sit right next to them. We'd probably go to a different carriage, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
We'd move further down the platform, because that's common sense, isn't it? We'd approach that with a physical boundary. Yeah.
Yes.
If we're in a situation with a co-worker, for example, and you might be sharing the same space, you might be in a pod, they might be a co-worker there, or it could even be your manager. Well, we've got a functional relationship there, so we need to manage that because we have KPIs, with our role, we'd need to perhaps manage that in a very specific way. I mean, obviously, if that breached things like human rights or code of conduct or, diversity, harassment, if it went into that space where operational health and safety was, those pieces were defiled in some way, you'd have a leg to stand on. There'd be a process that you'd need to go through, wouldn't there? Yeah.
Yeah.
We even have, mediation kind of pathways that people can work with in the workspace to address those kinds of things. Yeah. To implement those kinds of boundaries. Yeah. Now, when we're talking about family members, it could be anything from siblings through to parents, you name it.
Yeah.
Well, I think with siblings, we tend to cut them off, don't
You just ghost them.
I mean, if it gets too bad,
Yeah.
as when we become adults, that would be regarded as a physical boundary, wouldn't it?
Correct.
We're kind of limiting our time with them. Yeah. But we'd move to probably either an emotional boundary or a psychological boundary. And that would be where we're not letting them into our airspace. We're not letting them get to us in a particular way. And of course, because obviously with family functions and things like that, we need to be present. We're not going to miss someone's wedding or a tangi.
Yes.
Just for the sake of not getting on with a sibling, we'll just turn up, but we won't talk to them.
Are there Nigel, are there really simple kind of rituals that you can do for spiritual protection in those kind of instances?
I think the most important of all of them would be your relationship to, one, your own energy, and secondly, your relationship to the divine. Now, I know the minute I say that, some people are going to think that that is religious, or they're, so when I say the divine, that's whatever that is for you. That could be an angel, that could be God, that could be Yahweh,
Yeah.
that could be, a particular presence that you work with. Yeah. Something that is divine, you know, working on that premise that we are born in their likeness. Yeah. Um, and of course, when we're entering into the spiritual work anyway, we have to recognize that greater sense of who we are. Yep. So I think firstly, your relationship to that has to be in place. The power of prayer, and karakia, I mean, that is without a doubt one of the most important things that you can do. And and look, you'd need to be able to do that properly. Not a lot of people know how to pray. Not a lot of people are taught how to pray.
Yeah.
You've got to obviously approach that with the right mindset. You've got to be cleansed. You've got to make an offering. I mean, who makes an offering these days? That can be as simple as lighting a candle. I offer fruit, and flowers from my garden, water, that kind of thing. As I would with my ancestor altar, I would offer um, pieces to my ancestors, but that's to support the healing. There's a different aspect to that. But I think, you know, obviously cleansing your own energy, yes, there are different ways to do that. Cleansing the tools that you work with, cleansing your space, this kind of thing. That's going to start with your own personal hygiene. That's going to start with keeping your house clean. I mean, Amber, we can eat off your floor when we go to your place, because your place place is so clean and tidy.
Exactly. See? A clean home.
Yeah.
I'm always pushing for a
Every
clean
Sunday
home.
we're
A
clean.
I wonder if people live there.
Yeah.
It's like a show home.
That's how it's supposed to be, Nigel.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I've just tidied up this bit behind, so it looks like my lounge is tidy. Pan around to the kitchen, you'll see.
There's certain cultures that use different tools like sage and Palo Santo and water. Like our, culture uses a lot of water for cleansing. Is there one particular thing? Is it cultural appropriation? What's your thoughts around using healing or cleansing
So I
things?
think the sacred element, I mean, they are predominant in all of the Aboriginal cultures, the Aborigines, and sacred water is one of those aspects. But Tohunga were very well known for using sacred smoke, for the burning of herbs, and I mean, that's not uncommon. That could be anything from incense, Palo Santo, through to resins, you name it. We're looking for something that is going to purify, because what in fact you're doing, what you're referring to, is like a purification ritual. That's what it would be, commanding the sacredness of a particular element and then applying that to your will. That's it's what we do when we set the intention through karakia, where we're actually invoking that as part of it to support us in that, whatever we're doing with that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
So, appropriation, I think, let's not forget that our ancestors traded with with lots of cultures around the world.
Yeah, very true.
It wasn't just, kumara and women they were trading.
Yeah, very true.
Things like ritual and and the
practices.
observation of that.
Yeah.
Um, I tend to think that Māori are just incredibly clever, you know,
Yes.
very talented,
Yeah.
and you know, um, and talented to apply things in a way that to the betterment of everyone.
Yeah. On your journey, Nigel, over the many years, have you had to deal with many negative or heavy energies within that spiritual side? And how have you navigated that? How have you
Yeah.
protected and supported yourself?
Um, so that it is. So yes, I have. Um, it's a very confronting thing to work with, um, and you know, um, and it can really interfere with your mental health. Now, this can be anything, like I said, from a neighbor who is
Yep.
you know being particularly bad, through to, as I was saying, family members, or it can be prevalent in the spirit world.
Yes.
And look, I think perhaps one of the most believable pieces here is that, if we go back far enough, well, we don't even have to go that far actually, you know, to see a couple of family members having a ho-ha about
Yeah.
something
That's right.
and laying down a curse in some
Yeah.
way. I mean, you know, we see it in our own families. We experience it with our own siblings, and so what we don't understand are the implications around entanglement and karma that are created through that, and the damage that it's doing towards others.
Yeah.
Nigel, can you explain a curse? Is it just words or words with intention? Is it spells? What is it?
Okay, so a curse, an old school curse. So, okay, as I was talking earlier about the power of prayer, yeah. So, a curse has the same element, yeah. So, the power of prayer, we'd be looking at a ritual of entering into a space where we would invoke a deity, we would make an offering, yeah. We would bring intention to that and purpose, and in many ways, the power of prayer is even intensified through group prayer. Where we might come together as a family and say grace. We might, as a community, as a circle, in this way around a common ideal. And in fact, group prayer is incredibly strong and potent. But when we look at things like curses, it's exactly the same makeup. Yeah. So, you'd be invoking a deity, and that would be a dark deity. Instead of making an offering, you'd be making a sacrifice. You'd be killing an animal. You'd be whatever, in that space. There'd be a group of you coming together to lay that intention, that foundation stone. So an old-fashioned curse is going to be created in that manner. Yeah. And a curse can be anything from clumsy through to something old school and well orchestrated. Yeah. And by clumsy, I mean just with negative intention and energy, commitment to that, backing that, But what in fact you are doing with a curse is you are creating a contract, and then you are asking an entity to fulfill that contract, So you'll manifest something as part of that to then pick that contract up and then to go out and enforce the will of that, your will. We're bending, commanding that to our will. Yeah. So as opposed to the evil eye, which is really about envy and jealousy. Yeah. So, what? How have you experienced any curses, Amber?
Only through working with people like you, Nigel, and through crystal dreaming and kind of uncovering those types of things. So I feel it's more prevalent than people think, and also can be passed down through your ancestral line. People's, ancestors may have been part of a curse, and then it got passed down to the descendants. I think people forget that, once somebody passes away, doesn't mean that the energy around that person leaves. It can stay for generations.
Yeah, and when I first, so I've been living here in Melbourne for about 15 years now, and when I first got here, we don't talk about black magic at home, do we? And
No.
and of course people were talking about it here, and I was like, oh, I don't believe in that. You know, and that was really just me saying I've not heard of it, I've not seen it, therefore it doesn't exist. And of course it's very prevalent in the European communities here,
Yes.
in the Arabic and Muslim communities. It's very prevalent.
Mm.
And in fact, a lot of the work I do in that space, in that healing space, is very much working with people in those communities.
Wow.
And then having witnessed something like psychic attack, um, you know, so here's the thing, and that is, if you're the recipient of that, if you are, and that can be the recipient in terms of that being prevalent in your bloodlines, as you were talking about, Amber. Let's say that curse was laid down by your grandparents or great 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 grandparents. Doesn't matter. It'll be running down the lineage, and so when you become more aware of that, I think my belief is that the spirit world is going to support you in helping that to be nullified and made void.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, when it involves ancestors, this is where ancestral work is really important, because it's the ancestors who invoked the curse who need to be involved in that being nullified.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need to gain their consent in order to bring that to a close.
Mm.
Yeah. And this is where the modality that you work with, Amber, is just brilliant. The crystal dreaming, I think, is just really fab. Do you want to talk about that? Have you talked about that?
I've talked about it a little bit on other, other podcasts, but yes, it is a very powerful modality that involves a person lying in a mandala of crystals, and they stay talking to me, the practitioner, through the whole thing, and we kind of go through different things in their scanning their body, and they pick up on different things such as past lives or curses or trauma from childhood, and we look to heal or release and get rid of those things in the session.
I think it's super strong. Both Nigel and I have had you as a practitioner, and I just had an amazing, both experiences were really full on.
Yours were
It was awesome.
I can't handle the sessions with you.
I found it just really empowering. I think that you're going to, the spirit world kind of feels you really when you're kind of jumping into that and having to work through that.
Agreed. Yes.
But and it brings with it a sense of resourcefulness. And I just, I found that just really incredible. But it's a journey.
Yeah.
And so that work is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I agree, Nigel.
And I'll be coming back for another session.
Well, you're going to have to come back for a session with Kebrasca and do some hono too.
Yeah, you can do both.
Oof. Get ready for that one.
Nigel, you also teach a workshop around psychic and psychic protection. With regards to that protection, can you tell us more about what's involved in that workshop that you do and how people can participate in learning about that to help themselves out?
Look, that's covering the things that I was talking about earlier. We'd learn purification rituals. We'd learn the power of prayer. We'd touch on things like curses and the evil eye.
Yeah.
We'd have the discussion around things like establishing, maintaining effective boundaries, because that's what this is about. And you know, the approach that I was talking to earlier around how we would manage it in our living life is the approach that we would work with in the spirit world.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
the big difference, you know, with the spirit world is that, you know, we can develop relationships with other beings who are protective, can shield some of that for us.
Like a
You know,
bodyguard.
Yes.
that's right. I mean, the most powerful would be the divine, it would be God, you know, and but there are other soul beings and energies available there, particularly, you know, if you're doing ancestral work, then, you know, some of our ancestors would have worked with particular spirits and energies to bring about certain consequences. So, as you know,
Mm.
but I think that um, protection is something, you know, we can't click a finger, can we? And
Yeah.
suddenly we're protected.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to build that in layers.
Mm.
You know, you know, you can't, you know, if you've got you know, a troubling relationship with a relative, with a family member,
Mm.
you know, you're not going to have a conversation and suddenly it's sorted.
You know.
You know, far from it. You know, so that's got to be approached with diplomacy and layers. You've got to be consistent with that approach. There's going to be times where you're going to feel overwhelmed.
Mm.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a, you know, if it's your boss at work, you know, well, you know, we'd want to hope that they'd leave one day.
Yeah.
Meantime, we're stuck
Yeah,
here.
that's it.
So maybe that means we have to look for a new job
Yeah.
or a new team to work
Yeah.
on or something like that.
Yeah. Nigel, you just touched on spirit guides and protectors earlier. Can you tell us the difference between a spirit guide, a guardian, a protector?
So um, the spirit world is a big place, and in terms of how we work mediumistically with others, you know, we can have ancestors, we can have spirit guides. There can be other soul beings or other spirits, other energies that are present there that are both opportunistic and also available for us to work with in certain ways and in certain practices. And when we're talking about a protector, for example, you know, for a lot of our origine and aboriginals, our mana whenua, you know, so there is likely to be either an ancestor that sits on that bloodline who would have in their waking life demonstrated an element of protection and leadership. Yep. So on one of the main bloodlines that I work on, so Te Rauparaha, who was my second cousin, so he is the protector that sits on that lineage. Yeah. So and he was like a general in an army. You know, he's was a person. He was a tohunga actually, and the chief of the Ngāti Toa tribe, and he moved them from Kawhia. down to Wellington, the Kapiti Coast, and Kapiti Island. So he's very well known for that, but um, also very well known for his military prowess. And so, it's likely to be a soul being that during their life, if they were incarnated, that they would have held that responsibility. Yeah. I like working with protectors and guardians because there's such a deep, trusting relationship there. They're the ones who keep us safe, you know. But they're not going to step forward and work with us unless we develop a relationship with them, unless we put the mahi in and
Yeah.
and develop and nurture that relationship, you and that is a protector that has, it took me about maybe three or so years to develop a closer relationship with.
Mm.
And there was a lot of other things that needed to happen, but that's a very close relationship. So a protector is going to be there to assist you to develop those boundaries, to provide spiritual protection, and to guide you through that process. Yeah. um, Whereas something like a healer or a group of healers, so they can be ancestral, they can be, a particular type of soul being, and they don't all have to be previously incarnated. For example, you could be working with our off-world friends, and by that I mean ETs. So our tupuna were very familiar with working with ETs, so that's all kete pai. So long as you do your due diligence in that space, obviously, we don't want to be just working with any opportunistic type of energy. You've got to approach that with discernment practice, with the right mindset. um, and I think that's where a lot of students get tripped up, because
Yeah.
when they
Agree.
first start, they're just so excited, to have something there.
Yeah.
But when they don't care. They've just got something and they're going to work with it.
Yeah.
And that's a recipe for some great learning, as you know,
Yep.
and as you've seen others. And um, it's really interesting because, I have to be careful how I put this. um, when you're working in anything of a that I've personally found, and folks, this is for entertainment purposes only. So,
Yes. Yes, it is.
so when you're when we're talking with spiritualist movement or ideology, um, when we're um, navigating and through a space that is heavily supported and contextualized by, oh goodness, I have to be careful how I put this, European ideologies, yeah, non origine, non mana whenua, you know, um, they're dead against working with spirit guides. You know, you've encountered that, haven't you? With
Yeah.
when you've been on, I don't know, doing a course
Different
with
courses.
a teacher or
Yes.
this kind of thing, and they're being very derogatory towards people who are working with spirit guides, or they don't even mention ancestors, yet you'll be in a mediumship class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, why would you, it's to me, saying loved one, why wouldn't you just say ancestor? You know, tupuna. Why
Yeah.
would you just, to me, it just, um, I can understand it that, it might be a friend, someone from school, that we're working with. um, but that's a very controversial discussion, and particularly when we're talking about working with spirit guides who are ETs.
Yeah.
The universe is a big universe.
Yeah, exactly.
Think that we're the only ones here, you know, and do the mahi, figure it out,
Yeah.
Yeah.
get in there, and have a fossick about, and I think the and this is why, in my belief, healers are the most noble, because um, the heart is there at the forefront of everything that they do. The channels are open, particularly the spiritual healers. You know, Christ was a medium and a healer, and spiritual healing was the order of the day. But, you've got to bring a sense of humbleness to that and be open, and it cuts through to what we were talking about earlier, doesn't it? Around, learning new ways to heal and help others. That's going to be contextualized by our own healing. But, I understand that for some people, they're dead against working with spirit guides, they're dead against working in trance, when it starts to sound like, there's a rule for this and a rule for that,
Yes.
and,
Yeah.
and that's been, talked to me by someone that has no connection to their ancestors. I'm just like, there's a part of me that just wants to focus on other bits.
Nigel, is there a way for people who haven't started that journey of connecting with spirit guides or guardians, is there a way that they could know that sometimes they're trying to communicate with them? Or would that happen more once they start developing themselves and start working on healing or learning?
Okay, so everyone is psychic, but mediumship is something that requires a certain type of person, I believe. So the spirit world chooses you. Um, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I feel the same. I feel like everyone is psychic, but
Yeah.
not everyone is a medium.
Yeah.
Maybe some people think they are, and you've had a few things like
Yeah.
that lately, haven't you?
I've had a lot of people that have dreams or they have connections and they feel like it is a spiritual connection or a guardian kind of connection or an angel connection. And I think for me, it's interesting to have them say that when I'm not feeling that they've started their journey on healing themselves or learning at the same time. I think it's both of those things need to go hand in hand at the same time.
Yes, I agree.
Otherwise, they're kind of stabbing in the dark and not truly understanding what it's like to go on the journey. That's
I
been my
understand,
experience.
and you're right. You're absolutely right. Because if you've not developed that discipline, if you've not gone to that gym to exercise the unfoldment of your abilities and to orient them in the right way towards working mediumistically, then how can you determine what the informational message is?
Yeah.
And because from what context is that coming? Now,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to
No, yes, that's
not
right.
trying to demonize or diminish or this kind of thing. What I'm supporting is development. It's the building of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of my teachers, his way of addressing this is that if you don't have an understanding of who you are, of what your spirit is, of what your essence is, if you don't understand that and realize that, and develop that conscious connection with yourself in that way, then you will never be able to connect with someone else
No.
and
Yeah, it's true.
appreciate that. Lord forbid someone in the spirit world. You know, do the mahi, do that work,
Yeah.
work on yourself first and foremost. Don't have those expectations. Be open to see where that takes you. You know, because when I first started, I wanted to be a forensic medium. It's, I was like, that's what I want to do. I'm like, you know, and then I spent all those, did all those workshops and classes and, you know, to get myself into that space to learn, you know, forensic, psychic and mediumistic development. And you know what? In getting into that space, I found it deeply troubling and really difficult because you're
Wow.
working on cold cases and you're having to interview the dead and
Oh
you're,
man.
you know, reliving how they were how they were unalived, this kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
deeply
That's
traumatizing.
quite heavy. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was like, I don't want to do this. It's like,
Yeah.
where did that come from?
Yeah. It takes a certain type of person, I think, to do that kind of work because it's like, you know, if you're not going to be a detective in the life where you're alive, you know, like working with people doing detective cases and going through those gory details, it would be really difficult to do that in the spirit world as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You're right, and I think you're touching on a really brilliant subject there, and that is one of evidential mediumship.
Yes.
Because we've, you know, all done those classes and that, because that's the predominant footprint now in the space of mediumship. Everyone's working evidential, which um, I think has its place, but I think it's incredibly limiting. And of course, it's been developed for public demonstration, you know, in the supporting the SNU, the Spiritual National Union in the UK. So, you know, it's their whole ideology is based on that, you know, but nothing beats just having a conversation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Agreed.
and just relaying the sentiment of that. We forget that, you know, and, you know, um, yeah, yeah, we forget that it's relationship driven.
Any questions?
Oh, oh, just having a look here. Yeah, we could go on forever, Nigel. But yeah, you've probably, you know, got cats to feed and things like that. But yes, what is if there's one thing that you want people to know about spirituality, about this whole world, what would it be?
Um, hmm. I think that um, I think that when we talk about spiritual development, what we're really talking about is self-development. So cultivating a level of self-awareness is really key. So no matter what you're doing, you know, being self-aware, connected to who you are, living with authenticity,
Yeah.
you know, um, that has got to be coming into alignment, being authentic to who you are, you know, recognizing that and honoring that, I think, is really the cornerstone um, of that. And that's not an easy feat, you know. You know, goodness. I mean, I'm in my 60s now, and and it's taken me that long, you know, to really understand who I am. You've got to live a life, don't you, to really appreciate who you
Yeah.
are.
Correct. Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, maybe I'm a slow learner. You know, some things, some lessons in life, it would be fair to say that I found extremely difficult to learn. Yeah. You know, and I have been very grateful to have the opportunity to learn. Yeah.
And we're really grateful for your time this afternoon, Nigel, to sit with us, share space, answer our questions from our community as well as ourselves, and just really be open and support our journeys, both individually and collectively. We both would not be doing what we're doing had it not been for you and your guidance and your support for both of us in our own individual ways, and we're truly, truly grateful for everything that you've done for both Amber and I. So thank you so much for being there.
You're really welcome, and you've been you guys are great to work with, and and to have fostered that closer connection and friendship with. And of course, we're both cat people, so that
Yes, that's and tea.
That's everything.
Cats and tea,
All right, so thank you so much. It's lovely to share in this with you.
Thank you so much, Nigel, and have a good evening, and
Yes.
go cuddle your kitties for us, and we'll see you next time.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
And for everyone that wants to go and check out Nigel Eru's website, or get in contact with him, or even reach out to him with regards to a session or a class that he runs online, it doesn't matter where in the world you are, you can literally go and check out his website, which is nigelerumedium.com. There's all the classes, services, and everything that he runs all the time. We have been going to those classes for many, many years, and it has truly helped us with our growth, with our learning, and our abilities within our own practices.
We've done all the classes. We've done
them all.
Everything from tarot to mediumship, psychic, ancestral healing, the lot.
And
it's
we
worth
still
it.
do them today.
We still do them today. Yeah. So, check it out. And if you're interested, or if you're a seasoned practitioner, still check it out, because it's worth it.
And there's in person as well as online, so it doesn't matter where you are in the world. Go and have a look at Nigel's website, and thank you so much for all the questions and for people choosing in this week on Creative Talk Podcast. Next week we'll be back again on Thursday with another episode around both mindfulness, spiritualness, and also business. So make sure you come back next week on Thursday, 4 p.m. We look forward to seeing and sharing with you again the world that is both Amber and I from Creative Talk Podcast.